been a minute since we've had a new Transformers movie. Rise of the Beasts promises globetrotting and destruction, so is it worth seeing in the theater? Noah, a sharp young guy from Brooklyn, and Elena, an ambitious, talented artifact researcher, are swept up in an ongoing conflict as Optimus Prime and the Autobots face a terrifying new nemesis bent on their destruction. So if you've seen any of the Transformers movies, you know the general premise is bad robots are out for destruction and domination, leaving the Autobots to protect Earth. In Rise of the Beasts, that's still the same guiding principle for the story. Now in this case, we follow this baddie named Scourge, who Peter Dinklage voices, and he comes to Earth in search of this device that will allow easy travel through universes. We're introduced to the Maximals, who are animal-themed Autobots, for lack of a better term, and then when Scourge arrives on Earth with his Terracons, the Maximals and Autobots team up to stop him. Now, this aspect of the movie is very familiar and basically mimics most of the other stories in terms of plot. But what this does exceptionally well is introduce human characters who are charismatic and fun to watch. Anthony Ramos and Dominique Fishback play Noah and Elena respectively, and they meet up during a robot altercation and then travel with the Autobots to search for the device that Scourge is also searching for. Now first, with Noah, Anthony Ramos is just extremely likable and naturally funny. He's not trying to do comedy, but his delivery is perfectly timed to instill just the right amount of snarky humor. And in addition to that, he's got heroic qualities. He takes care of his sick younger brother, he was a soldier, and now is doing his best to help provide for his family. He's mostly a stand-up guy, and even when he's in some questionable situations, he's still somebody that I was rooting for, thanks in part to his charm. And with Dominique Fishback playing Elena, she's wildly intelligent, and I really appreciated the softer moments that we get with her. She's a tough young woman who's more than up to the tasks, but there is a very tender moment that she shares with Noah that made me just love them as a couple. Not a romantic grouping, but just teammates who would count on each other. And they shared a good dynamic that's encouraging and enjoyable to watch. I liked a lot of the voice work too. I'm still so glad that Peter Cullen continues to voice Optimus Prime. It's the voice I grew up hearing, and to have anybody else attempt to recreate that iconic sound, I think it'd be nearly impossible. But in addition to Cullen, we have Peter Dinklage, who I mentioned before, and then we got Ron Perlman, Michelle Yeoh, Colman Domingo, Pete Davidson, and Cristo Fernandez. And they all help to personalize their robots and make them unique. Part of the reason I think a lot of us watch these movies, aside from nostalgia, is for the action, and this one delivers. There's some wonderfully choreographed sequences, and even though 99% of what we're seeing during fights is CGI, the camera dances around the battlefield to capture the fights in really long takes. We're able to see the blows land and the bodies just be ripped apart without a lot of quick cutting. And there is the use of slow-mo at times, which is fine and it's not too distracting. Thankfully, it also didn't become a crutch in the action. Now, personally, I could have used less of it, but it's not excessive. And when there are the fights, they're really exciting to watch. Most of them are complex and involve a ton of destruction, so they're not over quickly, and that also adds to the fun of watching. Now, I think the effects are done pretty well too. They're not flawless every single time, but for the majority of the film, the textures and the shadings of all the robots are done well to mimic realism. There was this one scene at the beginning of the movie where I thought the graphics were done exceptionally well. There's a moment we first meet Scourge, and as he's coming into view, the visuals reminded me of the first Iron Man movie, when Iron Man is in that desert town and he fires his rockets backwards to destroy the threat while facing the camera. That level of naturalness is shown in that first scene of this movie, and it's impressive. And in so many of the previous Transformer movies, we've had very memorable music as part of the soundtrack. A lot of which was from Linkin Park. Well, this movie now takes place in the mid-90s, and we get to hear all sorts of amazing hip-hop from artists like Wu-Tang, LL Cool J, A Tribe Called Quest, and Notorious B.I.G. Plus, some of the score was composed by Steve Jablonsky, who did the first Transformers movie, so there are going to be some familiar tunes all the way around. Now, something I think this movie has going for it is that it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's just a tiny bit over 2 hours. I didn't feel the time at all. The story keeps moving at a quick pace, allowing just a bit of downtime between action sequences before ramping back up with a chase or a huge battle. And by maintaining that excitement, the story doesn't feel rushed, but also doesn't feel like it's dragging. Maybe the only reason it could feel a little long is because the story devices are just so familiar, making the progressions easy to predict. And this was fun to see in a packed theater because when a joke landed, even if it was cheesy, the audience laughed together. And when there are some amazing action sequences, or maybe a character does something particularly awesome, the collective satisfaction from the crowd, that's a fun experience. So overall, while the brand may be a bit tired, Rise of the Beasts continues the path begun by Bumblebee and delivers engaging and charismatic human counterparts. The action is exciting, allowing us to see the robot details as they clash in a mangled metal melee. This is a fun entry in the Transformers universe and is loads better than some of the sequels. It's sure to satisfy the kid in everybody, especially if you love nostalgia. There is a sort of mid-credit scene, and while it may appear on the surface to be a bit corny, the 80s kid in me is super excited to see where it's going to lead. There's no sexual nudity, some profanity, and then a ton of violence. I give Transformers Rise of the Beasts 3.5 out of 5 couches. So are you a fan of these movies? Do you have a favorite one? I still really enjoy the first Transformers, but then Bumblebee was awesome too. Let me know your favorite though in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.